Hey, this is a video for Energy Flow 3. So go ahead and check out the essential vocabulary and set up your guided notes. So we're going to talk about ecological succession. And ecological succession it's a process that takes a long time. And it's a process that starts out with bare earth. Now, this is something that I recently went to Hawaii and I saw like lava that had flown or, poured out onto the ground, and it's basically fresh rock. So whenever you have bare earth or just plain rock, you can start the process of ecological succession. And that is, simply put, it is a gradual change of organisms and habitats in an ecosystem. So we have primary succession, where we had bare earth, where there was no soil. We also have secondary succession, and that would be after a natural disaster, like, for example, a forest fire or a flood. I'm going to show you the example using primary succession, where we have bare earth. So after some time, you'll get some mosses and lichens. Moss is like the fuzzy stuff that grows on trees, and lichens is the scaly stuff that grows on trees. But that will grow on the rocks, and what happens is it will start to break down the rocks. And over time, the rocks will break up into smaller and smaller pieces, and eventually it could break it up, and then adding dead organic material, dead tissue, can be added to the rock. And basically that's the start of soil formation. So again, this will take up to hundreds of years for the entire process. Sometimes it takes shorter, sometimes it takes longer. When I was in Hawaii, we saw lava flow from the 1800s, and it still looked pretty much like this. There were a couple of trees, but it didn't have any lot of organic material. Now, after you get the mosses and lichens, it will start to build up some layers. And these first organisms are called pioneer species. And they're the first organisms to populate an ecosystem during succession. And oftentimes it's going to be mosses and lichens. And then eventually we will get grasses that will grow in. They'll grow in these little cracks that are forming. Because when the mosses and lichens are growing on the rocks, they'll start to break apart the rocks because they secrete chemicals and release chemicals that will start to break it down. Now the grasses grow, and when they die, their tissues will decompose on the rock and add more and more layers. So eventually you might get little shrubs, little tiny bushes that grow. And then eventually you might get an evergreen forest, and then you will get a hardwood forest. Now, this is a normal process that will always occur based on the type of climate that you have. So if you have a climate that will not support trees, it's going to stop somewhere in this stage. Like where I'm from in Minnesota, we don't really have there are trees, but there's a lot of grasslands. So in some areas, like, in the Midwest, ecological succession will stop at grasses. In some areas, it'll stop at an evergreen forest. In some areas, it will continue on to become a hardwood forest. And this is just based, again, on the climate. So the precipitation, the rainfall, and the temperature of that area. Now, we can also show this with a graph. So whenever we see ecological succession, they're always competing for sunlight, because these are organisms that produce glucose through photosynthesis. So the first ones that will peak will be the grasses. This is early succession. And then we're going to get maybe some shrubs. So shrubs are like little tiny bushes. If you notice, that shows up a little bit later. And when the shrubs start appearing, the grasses cannot compete with them, so the grasses start to die out. Now, after a little bit more time, you might get some birch trees. Now notice their populations increased very rapidly. They took advantage of that sunlight. And when they started growing, the shrubs were not able to compete, so they ended up dying out. Now you'll notice the birch tree started dying off. This would be considered a middle successional species. Now eventually we have spruce trees, which are they look like Christmas trees. And then we'll also have maple trees. Now this graph is not continued on, but if this were to continue, the maple tree may, extend out here. and the spruce trees start to level off and decrease. Because again, this may be a habitat that is able to accommodate maple trees. Okay, so what I would like you to do is to continue on and practice with practice problem set 3. I hope that this video is informative. I thank you for your attention, and I'll see you soon.